Okay, so this video is going to be about the texture coordinate, how it works, and some of the more advanced things you can do with it once you understand what it is. So we're going to start in Photoshop just to explain it. Alright, so the first thing you need to understand, probably be helpful if I had 50%, alright, is that numbers are just displayed in terms of value as 0 and 1, and then every shade in between is a decimal. So for example, 50% gray is 0.5. Now the way this works with the texture coordinate is you can think of it as a number grid. Excuse me. So the red channel has a number gradient from 0 to 1 going left to right, so it's just a number line. And then the green channel, well, okay, so let me start with the way it usually is. It has a number gradient going from, and then let me turn this channel to 0. It has a number gradient going from 0 to 1, bottom to top. Now, if you look at this, you'll notice that it doesn't look like the texture coordinate in Unreal, and that's because in Unreal, and this is why for normal maps a lot of the time we need to flip the green channel, because for whatever reason Epic decided that they wanted their number line to start with 0, 0 in the top left corner instead of the bottom right. So if you think to something like Maya, you know, they'll have their UV space, and up here in the top right they'll have like 0, 0, 1, 1. But for us, the numbers are like this. So that's, just to be clear, red channel is the first number and green channel is the second number. So these are all zeros, all 0.5s, all 1s for the red channel, and then all zeros across the top for the green channel, all 0.5s in the middle, and then all 1s for the second number. Okay, so how can we use this knowledge? I'm going to go over a couple of examples, but the first thing I want to do is just show what I'm doing on the graph function, because I think that'll help visually represent what's going on in a very clear way. The first thing I'm going to do is set the range from -1 to 1 and change it to just the 0 to 1 range. So if we preview that, and then I'm just going to add 0, so no changes, and we see a perfectly straight line going from 0, 0 to 1, 1. Okay. And the next thing I'm going to do is bring in a texture. It's called Perlin, and we're going to be using the green channel for the distortion, and this is what that looks like. Alright. So the first thing I'm going to do is just multiply the green channel by a smaller number, because, well, as you can see, it goes a little crazy at high values. We're just trying to subtly distort this function. So, whoops, maybe 0.1. Alright, and as you can see, it's pushed the line in a wiggly pattern above the gray baseline, which is what you would expect if it had no modifications. But what I'm going to do, and the reason I'm showing you this first, is I want the distortion to go above and below the line. So to do that, I'm multiplying all of the values, and just as a reminder, 0 and 1 are just numbers, so all the blacks here are zeros, all the whites here are 1s, and everything in between is a decimal. So what we're essentially doing, we're multiplying everything by 2, so the zeros still stay 0, the 1s become 2s, and then we're just going to subtract. I like to use add, but I'm just subtracting 1 from that, and that will push all of the values into the -1 to 1 range. So the 0.5s, they were multiplied by 2, which made them 1s, and then we're subtracting 1 from that, which makes that the new 0. So now 0.5 on the texture is the new middle, and black, which was 0, is now the -1. Hope that makes sense. But as you can see, now it goes back and forth across the line. And you may not always want that, but for this demonstration, I want it to distort in both directions. So basically, if you think of the texture coordinate as a sheet of graph paper, what we're doing with this here is crumpling up the graph paper a little bit, and this number that we're scaling the texture by is essentially how much or how little we're crumbling it. So if I lower the number, then it's a much more subtle wavy line. So what are some of the types of things we can use this for? Well, basically anything that uses the texture coordinate. So for example, a sphere mask. Sphere. And another example would be checker. Now, generally speaking, we would be plugging this type of thing into the UVs for a texture, but for the sake of legibility, I'm just going to show you on these, and also just to demonstrate that there's more than one way to use it. So a typical sphere mask takes in coordinates and a center point. So for this one, we're just going to call it, or let's just preview this, 0.5. and dial the radius down to 0.4 and keep the hardness. So this is what we normally get, just a mathematically perfect sphere. And here, let me just zoom this out a bit. If we take the coordinates and add our noise texture into them, then, as I said, with the crumpled graph paper analogy, we're still drawing a perfectly mathematical sphere, but the paper we're drawing it on is now messed up. Same with the checker pattern. If I put tiling amount into this, normally what we would see is a bunch of squares, but if I plug this in for the UVs instead, now we get wiggly squares. So now I'm just going to show you one of the things I've used this technique for in some of my recent work, and it starts with building a panner from scratch. So for a panner, you need a texture, and you need time, and a texture coordinate. And basically all a panner is adding numbers to the texture coordinate in 2 channels, and those channels are red and green, as we broke it down earlier. And so the red channel pans horizontally and the green channel pans vertically. So I'm just going to multiply time by this 2 channel, and say I want it to move vertically. So for that, I'll keep the red channel at 0 and use a positive or negative number for the green channel and multiply it by time and add it into the texture coordinate, and we see, preview node, that it's panning up. So if I wanted it to pan down, just change that to -0.2 and it's panning down, and the size of the number dictates how fast it goes. So if we increase it, it'll go faster. But we don't want a regular panner, we want a distorted panner. So how can we get that effect? Well, we take what we learned before with multiplying this by 2 and then subtracting 1, and then we scale it by noise amount. A small number, so for example 0.02, and then we add that into the coordinates that we're using for our panner. And just for legibility, again, I'm going to make a checker. Okay, and preview. Oh, that's really fast. So you can see this is distorted. And then we can take it even further and actually put panners into the UVs of this to make the distortion wiggle around, all sorts of things, but this is the basic setup.